I'm Mark Gagan, and you're listening to a special episode of the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Stevens Rickard. Today's episode is an absolute blast. That's because the person I'm talking to is unique. And I think that's because he spent quite a large proportion of his career a long way outside insurance and discovered our sector relatively late. But the crucial point is that it wasn't that late. Graham Elliott, CEO of Crux Underwriting, had enough experience outside the sector not to be too dyed in the wool and full of industry preconceptions, but he's been with us long enough to have had time to have already made a serious entrepreneurial impact on our sector at Oxygen Insurance Brokers, Aqua Underwriting and Azure Group. I first met him about 8 years ago at the beginning of the insurtech boom and found him incredibly valuable as someone who was very eloquent and adept at explaining the benefits of technology to a traditional insurance audience in words it could understand. Graham's latest venture is Crux Underwriting, a new Lloyd's MGA he has set up with experienced political risk and political violence underwriter Mike O'Connor. But this podcast is way broader than Crux's opening line of business. Our talk is an incredibly wide-ranging tour of the most advanced thinking around how global wholesale and specialty insurance and reinsurance is set to develop in the digital age that is currently dawning. AI, algorithmic trading, genuinely real-time digitized underwriting systems, and the reasons behind the boom in MGAs are all discussed in great detail. If you still haven't quite got your head around where the market is likely to be heading after our digital Big Bang is finally reached, I recommend this talk as a wonderful place to start. Graham is charismatic and charming, and I guarantee it won't be long before your imagination is sparked and you're swept up in the positive appreciation of some of the enormous opportunities that are available to smart entrepreneurs in today's market. This is a great way to start the year. Enjoy the podcast.
Graham, welcome to the Voice of Insurance.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. It's great to be here.
I'm looking forward to this chat very much. For anyone who doesn't know you, Graham, I've known you for about 7 or 8 years. There aren't that many people who know technology and know insurance and are good at speaking both of those. That's the way I've always associated you. But for anyone who doesn't know you, why don't you give us a potted history of your career to date and how you've got to where you are now at Crux?
Okay, so that's a great intro and probably a bit too flattering. Basically, I was a stockbroker running a global sales operation, selling US equities to institutions around the world, advising them on investments. And that was a business that was destroyed by democratization of data. It became a business where we were no longer adding value. And in the end, it stopped being a job. And I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I'd been living in New York, came back to the UK, and just through a friend, got a job at an insurance broker, Oxygen Insurance Brokers, as a chief operating officer. Didn't know anything about insurance, didn't know anything about operations.
How long ago was this?
This was 2009. So just after Lehman had gone.
Yeah.
It was great timing. Anyway, we ended up selling Oxygen. I took over as CEO of the broking business. And then I got a job at RK Harrison working with Paul Bridgewater, which was fantastic. As an in-house banker, we bought Gibbs Hartley Cooper from Marsh.
Oh, yes.
And I was the person who, I didn't negotiate the price or anything else, but I did all the commercial and all the financial DD and all the negotiations beyond
Gibbs
that.
Hartley Cooper was what had become HSBC, hadn't it?
Yeah, it had gone from HSBC into Marsh. It was a wholesale broker, I
Yeah.
think, at that point. And I began to see what was going on, and I thought RKH was an amazing vehicle. Paul said to me, would you mind taking a look at my MGA, Aqua? So I went and had a look at it and thought, wow, this is an amazing vehicle. I've found what I want to do. So we grew Aqua quite rapidly, did the deal with Hyperion, as was then Howden. That was great, but there really wasn't a slot for me. So I exited and I set up Azure Underwriting with the help of Andrew Brooks at Ascot. And we got the high net worth book of AIG and the people. AIG took a stake in the business and we grew the book from mid-20s to £60 million of business. We had 3 products when we started. We ended up with 9 products and we digitalized parts of the business and ended up selling that business to Aviva in 2021, 2022. I was very sad to see it go. At the same time, we had got a technology business going in the group, building tech for other people. So I had a bit of experience doing insurance and a bit of experience doing technology, as you said. And separately, I had been the non-exec chairman of a technology business on the West Coast called Bright Talk. So with all of that, a complete conviction that I didn't want to stop doing it and that technology was going to be still relevant and interesting.
Was Bright taught with those sort of video calls?
Yes. Webinars and sort of demand generation, fascinating business.
Yes, I think I probably came across it when I was a journalist. It was a sort of, we might use that as a tool to try and do a webinar, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's dead right. And bringing an audience with it. So novel business model, sold it to Tech Target at the end of 2020.
Oh, well done. It was a business that certainly was very visible. I remember seeing it everywhere. Well, we're right up to date. So you sold to Aviva. Obviously, hopefully your bank manager was pleased with you that day. And then obviously you've got something else you want to do. So what gave the idea for Crux?
So I decided that I didn't want to stop. I was no good at running a tech business, really. So that wasn't going to be an option. And the CEO of the tech business is much more suited to doing that than I am. So Mike O'Connor, who was just exiting Castell, and we decided that we were going to do something together. I'd always fancied the wholesale space because in many ways, it's one of the places where there's the most manual transactions going on. There's the least data model efficiency. And I felt that if you could crack some problems there, you'd have a really interesting business.
You're going for scaling Mount Everest here in insurance terms, I think. Everyone says, oh, it's too hard. It's too hard to deal with, isn't it? Wholesale insurance. The numbers aren't big enough. The problems are too, so we'll have to always be bespoke. We'll have to always be manual.
Yeah, I think if you look at how you scale a business, if you've got a retail MGA, you're going to build it one risk at a time. But if you get it right with the wholesale business, you can get a portfolio. So there is a scaling factor you can bring to wholesale that is harder to bring to retail.
And it's global by design and, it crosses borders.
Absolutely. And Lloyd's is a great platform to operate on for that because you've got licenses and you've got credit rating. So fabulous as a platform to start off with.
So specialty, what specialisms are you specialising in?
Well, we've started off with PV and terrorism, and we've got a $40 million line in PV. And a $400 million line in terrorism, which is a decent size.
My mission, obviously, to solve acronyms. PV is political violence. For anyone who doesn't already know that, of course they know. Everyone knew that. So how do you want Crux to be perceived? Obviously, there are brokers out there. I presume you're 100% broker business. What do you want those brokers to be thinking of when they're thinking of Crux and thinking, oh, I must give Graham a call?
So I think the really interesting positioning for an MGA between markets and the broker is you can look both ways, like Janus, and you can drive great user experience, which is actually asymmetric user experience to both sides by using data. And so what I want people to think of when they're a broker using us is they're so easy to deal with. They're really quick. They're really efficient. They solve problems for me. When I look at the carriers, I want to think, crikey, they're giving us live data. They're one of the few people that can give us live data. They know what's going on. Their bordereaux are spotless.
Well, they don't really have bordereaux because you can look straight in.
We'd love to be able to drop the data in directly, but that's not always possible.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that they could sort of self-serve whatever they want,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So in the end, if you know where the puck is going to end up, you can look to that and solve for that use case. And I believe that one of the things that we're talking about here is going live. Going live in terms of instantaneous response to brokers and going live in terms of instantaneous data in a delegated authority situation back to carriers so they know what they got on the balance sheet.
Yes, as if you were in-house or better than in-house even.
Yes, yeah, I think that's right. And then providing a great experience for the underwriter that's working with you that doesn't have then to go to multiple different systems to do what they've got to do and can underwrite rather than just drop emails into different places.
And what do you mean by asymmetrical in that sense?
So if you think about your iPhone, it's really simple on the outside and it's really complex on the inside. Your broker wants speed of answer. They don't want to answer 50 questions or 100 questions. You've got to ask them as few questions as you possibly can. And then you've got to use a thin technology layer to drive data enrichment to give the carriers the sophistication at the back end they want. So it's completely asymmetric. You stroke your iPhone, there's almost nothing on the outside of it. It does really clever things quickly for you. But inside, there's a ton of complexity going on. And I think that is where we're going to go because I believe that B2B experiences, business-to-business experiences, are going to become more and more like business-to-consumer experiences. People are going to want from their business-to-business interactions the same convenience and beautiful experience that they get from their consumer applications.
This episode is supported by Stevens Rickard. Stevens Rickard Limited is an executive search firm with offices in London, Miami and Zurich, and a specific focus on the global insurance and reinsurance markets. Their deep appreciation for the markets they operate in, assessment methodology and exceptional track record of completion really sets them apart. The team's dedication to searching beyond the obvious, the D&I synopsis reports they produce, and their obsession with doing the right thing by both clients and candidates is demonstrative of their enthusiasm for improving the businesses of their clients and the careers of their candidates. To find out more, head to stevensrickard.com.
The serene swan, on the lake, but with the furious paddling going on underneath, and no one can see that part.
There's always a lot of paddling going on. Anybody in technology will tell you there's a lot of paddling.
So it's really a technology play. You ask the smallest amount of questions about broker, and then presumably you're bringing in data from all sorts of third parties. Any way you can get data that's pertinent to the underwriting of this risk. But you can get whatever, just a zip code and a postcode from them. But you can enrich and get all this data from everywhere else, presumably as well.
Yeah.
And then bring it all together and turn it into a number that they can have within a few seconds, or?
Yeah, it's class specific. So the mid-net worth product we built, which we then sold to Aviva, had 5 questions on the happy path for the broker.
Wow.
In a typical broker-led market where there would be 40 questions usually. And
because it's sort of, how many grandmasters have you got?
Yeah. And it's really difficult.
Do you look after them properly?
So we API'd out to 28 million mortgage surveys. And then the machine could model, if you hadn't got number 3 Acacia Avenue, but you got number 1 and number 4, you could probably tell how big number 3 Acacia Avenue was. We API'd out to all the perils that you could go to: theft, flood, subsidence, a fire risk, and scored everything. So I must always sell the benefits in this, not the features. The broker can do a quote and a bind in 90 seconds. The underwriters delivering to the capital, 66 rating variables at the back end. That is asymmetry. And that's one of the jobs that technology can do really well for you.
Wow. So at the moment, if I asked any broker in Lime Street that had heard of you, they'd say, the political risk, political violence. Do you want to expand? Is there any way you wouldn't go? Or are you going to go, first of all, sort of to things that are adjacent to political risk and political violence, et cetera, and terrorism?
I think there's some natural adjacencies. I think the general rule is, if you're in a room full of elephants, you want to be in the cracks in the floorboards. So you're probably going to want to avoid getting trampled by the big guys. So there are things you might not swing at. But specialty, global specialty, is a phenomenal space to be in. And Lloyd's has got the biggest concentration, I think, of global specialty expertise in the world, which is incredibly powerful. And then only look at classes where you think the technology can make a difference. By the way, that's all classes in my opinion, but I might not be right about that. So only go after things where you really believe there's some value to add from what you're doing. Otherwise, you're busy fools.
Yeah. And in terms of that edge, is speed a big enough factor, do you think? I mean, it certainly seems to be.
I think it's a massive factor. There was a broker recently who was complaining publicly about how slow responses were. Number one, why would you want speed? There's a correlation between getting an answer quickly and winning the business. In almost any sales environment, that's true. And in brokers, it's certainly true. The second thing about speed is, if you run every risk the same way, you'll have an 80-20 rule in your portfolio. You'll have 20% of your portfolio is 80% of your premium, and 80% of your portfolio, which is massive volume, is going to be 20% of your premium. And if you treat every risk the same way across the whole portfolio, the small ones are going to slow you down from doing the big stuff. And the big stuff are going to distract you from adequately servicing the small stuff. So you've got to be able to drive speed where it's appropriate in the right way. For very complex risks, you can make it a better experience. But for simpler risks, you should be able to do a lot of automation.
Yes, absolutely. So do you triage?
No, not yet, although I think we would do. But I do think there's a problem with splitting the data objects across the system. So having a quote and bind system for small stuff and an underwriter workbench somewhere else. What you want is all the data in the center, and the underwriter workbench is one view of the data, and the broker hub that you give, or the portal, is another view of the data.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because you've got to future-proof against what's going to happen here. If everybody's got the idea that you build a hub and there's self-service for brokers, you have death by a million hubs. And the broker's going to go, I'm not going to sign into 14 different hubs to get a quote. They're going to build their own engine to message out and talk to different people who can do it. And you've got to be able to build your system for that use case, not just a quote and bind on a hub. And it sounds like it's obvious, well, we'll just change it. But running a system headless, i.e. without that user interface at the front, takes some doing. It's not a trivial thing to do. And you've got to architect your system to be able to do that. So I'm a big advocate of getting your data in one place and having one view of the data, or a single view for the underwriter, a single view for the broker. It's all in the same place.
It's all one pane of glass. Have you had to build all this yourself? There are lots of components and systems out there that you can bolt together, I suppose.
Yeah, so the architecture, I think it's probably not quite the right way of describing it, but it's the way I think of it is a microservices architecture, where you are APIing out, you're connecting to different sources that can do something better than you. So there are great tools out there for doing aggregate management. There are great tools for doing schedule of values ingestion and submission ingestion. And there are great tools for doing sanctions checking. What you want to do is not have those as distributed apps through your organization. You want them all talking to your central policy admin system. And the central policy admin system we've got is built on Salesforce, which is fantastic because it does so much out of the box that we don't have to worry about.
Exactly. So the philosophy is, I suppose, you occasionally have to build things so they don't exist. But otherwise, if it already exists, why try and reinvent it?
Yeah, why build a better version of Excel? There's no point. And there are a lot of people that think they can do that. But the question is why? What's the benefit of that, not the feature?
I think that's a very common problem in insurance, actually, is the amount of times I've spoken to a broker who said, well, we've got our placing platform and we've got this. And think, why don't you all just use the same one?
Yeah.
It'd be much better if you all did, because people don't say, oh, I love X broker because I love their placing platform. It's like, no, because they like your expertise and your understanding of this business and what a good price is and what kind of coverage you need or what coverage is obtainable.
Yeah.
And at what terms, all that stuff. That's why you go to broker. You don't go because got a nice hub.
That's a feature, not a benefit.
Absolutely. So MGAs, you're sort of living proof of that MGA boom that we've been in for over 10 years. Obviously, had a bit of waxing and waning, let's say, as the market hardened in that decile 10 sort of environment of 5 or 6 years ago. But all the top MGAs have sailed through that. And particularly in specialty business, we've had a real boom. Do you think there's anything permanent about that change? Or if it is, what's driving it?
Oh, my heavens, yes, it is. It's here to stay. And I think that MGAs do three things really well that it's either hard or nearly impossible for a single carrier to do. They're a great aggregator of line size, which then plays back to the speed thing. The strength of the London market is that you've got all these risks being placed in loads of syndicates. The weakness of the London market is you've got all these risks being placed in loads of syndicates. So how do you aggregate that line size? And it's a very effective way of doing that. The second thing that MGAs do is they aggregate appetite. So if you think of insurance as a product rather than a class, which I think is putting a more end user focus to it, if you've got only one source of capital, you can generally only write what the capital's got appetite for, but the people who bought this may buy this.
Yeah.
And that isn't just consumers, it's SMEs and it's mid-sized companies, big companies as well. So if you can aggregate different appetites to put together an interesting product that works for the customer, you will have real legs in what you're doing. And so you use the MGA to aggregate appetite. And the third thing I think MGAs are going to be seen to do is, especially if you start from scratch and you don't have any legacy, and a broker put this to me the other day, so I've got to partially attribute it, you're going to transform what they called analog appetite or analog capacity into digital capacity. And that is incredibly powerful because if the brokers go down the road, which I believe they will, of building their own trading platforms to trade with people who can do it, if you're sitting in a company with a sea of legacy, how do you get your systems to work to do that? It's not trivial. And it requires a mindset shift, and you've got to buy the right tech to do it. So if an MGA is already up and running and doing that, I think capital will be drawn to you because you can help them transform, and the brokers will be drawn to you because they want to do things in a digital way.
It's really interesting. I'm going to test one of my pet theories on you that I think technology has definitely got something to do with this, hasn't it?
Yeah.
That as you digitize something, I said, theoretically, you can deconstruct the value chain into its constituent parts. And underwriting is a thing that it's one part of the value chain, and it's one that creates most of the value. And obviously the distribution of broking is a very important part of the value chain as well. But because of technology, you can disassociate that underwriting skill from the capital, and that the underwriter can therefore get the economic benefit and capture more of the economic benefit of the added value that they are creating.
Yeah.
And the capital will do what capital does as well, which of course, and you can't do it without the capital. Of course, you need capital. And we have people who go and find the risks, and you're always going to need the broker holding the client's hand and explaining to them what is possible and what's not possible and making it all happen, making deals happen. I've always felt, yes, that technology is allowing the underwriter just to be an underwriter.
Yes. If you think about the underwriter job, they get a submission in terrorism. We've just had a submission in with 33,000 locations. You've got to send it to your ag team, who've got to cleanse the data because it will be probably a property manager's schedule of values that's got to be cleansed, and you've got to extract the data to put into your system to work out whether you've got the aggregate to be able to write it. It's then got to go to your sanctions checking team who do that. You've then got the underwriter rating it, probably an Excel spreadsheet or something, doing that work. You then load it into your policy admin system. You've got to quote it. You've got to bill it, and you've got to document it. And those things are not typically joined up. So the underwriter's buzzing around between different systems. And all of that is why you have such latency in the system. Whereas you should be able to, with 33,000 properties, in a class which is, you're more often than not a price taker because of the way terrorism is, you should be able to rate that and run it pretty quickly and get an answer back. And the underwriter's job then becomes, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do much more interesting things, much more complex things. Underwriters don't want to be firing emails around left, right and centre. They want to look at their underwriter workbench and know what's going on.
And also it's just going to be a better career, isn't it? Because they can actually own some of the equity. And also it's going to really correlate with what they're doing rather than sort of, I'm part of a large composite and we've had a bad year over in life and pensions and that's dragging us all down or whatever. There's always one division that's dragging everybody down. Whereas this, you eat your own cooking, don't you?
I think that's right. I think it's a great incentive, and it so reminds me of the hedge fund boom in the 90s and noughties, and it's going on now still. Assets are growing.
Well, the only thing about hedge funds that I'd put to you, obviously they were definitely flavour of the decade 2 decades ago, and then post-financial crisis, not necessarily poster children.
I think you read about the failures because every hedge fund strategy, there'll be somebody who falls out because they get it wrong.
It is an asymmetrical thing. It's sort of, I always get that with, as a journalist, people say, well, Mark, you only ever write about disasters. I say, I know, because they're interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
But dog bites man is not a story, but man bites dog is a story. And it's just the way it is. Sorry, it's asymmetrical.
Yes.
And so, yes, 15,000 redundancies is a story. Hiring one person every day is a really good news story, but it's not news.
Yeah, so a large hedge fund manager going down and being accused of all sorts of nasty things, and you think, oh God, the hedge fund boom's over. If you look at the SEC data on hedge funds, and gross assets in the industry in the US have grown from 13 trillion in 2014 to 30 trillion in 2024. So
it's just quietly getting on with it.
But if you did your chart back to the late 80s, early 90s, it will be a fraction of that.
Yeah.
So it's grown enormously, and the similarities are very striking. Hedge funds take third-party capital, they take risk on behalf of that third-party capital, and they get paid a performance fee if they make a profit. You've just described an MGA. It's an asset manager. And you've removed from the asset manager all of the capital management that goes on. You just basically say, you get on and you generate your alpha. And the alpha can be generated in an MGA 2 ways. Great underwriting, you need that. You can't have bad underwriting. And then really slick distribution to get that underwriting in front of people.
Alpha's just profit, isn't it?
Alpha's profit, sorry, yes.
The Greeks, wasn't it? There are all sorts of other ones, and deltas and gammas and whatever's, aren't there? But alpha is profit.
Alpha's risk-adjusted profit.
Risk-adjusted
So
profit.
you're not just going
Real
up and down
profit.
with the market. It's profit that you're taking over and above the risk you're taking.
Excellent. So it is a definition of your actual added value,
Yes.
your skill.
Absolutely. And it's a thing. There are underwriters with alpha and there are underwriters who don't have alpha. I would never have alpha. I'm not that sort of person. But you can see when you see it. And it's great for MGAs to be able to capture that and bring that to the table too.
So you just think it's going to carry on, this boom's going to carry on because it's better?
I wouldn't do it down. I just think it's got its place and it's not going to disappear. People go, it's a bubble. You'll have bubble moments in these things where everybody bids them up and then they get bid down again and the odd one will lose its capacity. But overall, it's going to carry on growing. It's a thing.
Yeah, do you think it might consolidate? Or because we've got some interesting incubator, those kind of models where you have lots of different underwriting units within, but somebody like you providing all that platform to say, hey, underwriter, come over here, leave your balance sheet company where perhaps your career is not going the way you want it to. Come over here, you bring your alpha and bring your team, and effectively you just plug in, and I'm going to provide you with a much better working environment, and also you get to eat your own cooking.
Okay, so consolidation is one thing. Lloyd's is still an entrepreneur's paradise. You could not set up a business like we've done with 3 people and get a business going in almost any other financial services sector and get traction like we've been able to get. And the reason why is because barriers to entry, they're quite high if you don't understand it. But if you understand how to do a regulated business, there's lots of people who can provide you services. We're umbrellaed by DA Strategy. They're fantastic. But I think the table stakes is going up, and it's going up because of the tech spend you need to make. So if you think about putting on a platform, you can start underwriting on an Excel spreadsheet. There's nothing to stop you. But the problem comes at the scaling point where you run into massive trouble with just drowning in data and drowning in not understanding what's going on, and you won't keep your delegated authority for very long if you do. I think the table stakes are going to be that you have to demonstrate a platform. And I think that part of that platform will be giving live data to your carriers, and part of that platform will be giving the asymmetric, easy user experience to brokers. So the ability to start up lots of small companies in the space is going to go a bit because it's going to become a big person's game over time, for sure. And hedge funds have grown massively. There are hedge funds managing billions and billions and billions of dollars. Enormous. And they used not to be. They used to be running hundreds of millions or $1 billion. But I think that scaling is going to present a barrier to entry for people. And the people with good platforms will, over time, win and do well. And the other thing about that, you talk about the MGA incubator model, is there are 2 types of approaches to it. One is to get cells on and they earn up into shares in their cell. And the other one is to get everybody on the same equity. I'm a Paul Bridgewater devotee on this one. I want to get alignment of interest at Topco, which means that everybody dilutes more, but you create much more alignment of interest around the corporate goals of the business.
So you don't want to have too many different cells here and there, where all people cutting across each other all the time.
Well, the problem is you lose the ability to do people who bought this also bought that. And you've got to think of the end customer and the end broker experience and what they want.
You're building the Amazon of specialty insurance, are you?
No, I don't think so. More like the brook down the road.
Yeah. This plus that plus this.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, something that's interesting, in this real-time environment with your carrier, with your paper provider, this has not really happened before. Do you think it will improve the relationship you have with those paper providers? You think, because it might be interesting that they'll be able to, of course, they'll have all the data as well. They'll be able to put it through their own analysis. And they might say, come back to you, Graham, I've spotted something in the data. Have you noticed this? And you could have a really interesting relationship that way, or make it more of a two-way thing rather than, hey, I've given you some paper, but you've screwed up. It can be far more interactive, couldn't it?
Well, you only have to think. I mean, capitalism is built on trust. Fiat money is trust money. There's, your pound note is not worth a pound's worth of gold. So the root of capitalism is trust. Anything that builds trust between counterparties or trading partners is a good thing. And if the capital knows that it can look at any time and know what's going on, it's likely to want to give you its capital versus somebody that it can't do that with. And so I think that's a really powerful way of building a partnership. And, the danger of the industry, and again, I come from a different environment where we knew our risk. I ran a bit of trading business there. We knew our risk on a second by second basis. We knew our nets and our gross. We knew what was happening. The danger of the industry is you're driving the car at 80 miles an hour along the road and using the rearview mirror to steer it. And that can be quite hazardous if you get to a bend. And the days when you've got the CEO, there's a big disaster happens somewhere, and the CEO rings around the class underwriter and says, well, what are we exposed to? What have we got here? And then they go, well, I don't really know because I've got all these cover holders who I don't really know what they're doing.
We'll find out in 3 months' time.
We'll find out in 3 months' time. That seems to me to be not really a 21st century solution.
No. I mean, it was the great market story in Lloyd's was Hurricane Betsy in the 60s. I can't remember which day I'll put it in the notes. But the following year, people actually suddenly reducing stamp because even with lines they'd actually put down, so phoning the record and say, I wrote a 10% line on that. I don't think I can actually.
Wow.
I need to ask you, can you place my 5 somewhere else?
Wow.
Because I did not know, because it took so long for the hurricane losses to come in. And they were multiples bigger than people thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
And yes, and it was the absolute latency of that market. So yeah, to an extent that the market may have been misrepresenting its financial condition, which is actually technically fraud, isn't it? But there you are. But there was so much inertia that it took a year for people to really know what their net position was.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
But they'd already traded through, so it was all okay.
Everyone was fine, yeah. But one day it won't be fine,
because the cash flow, it took a long time for those cash calls to come in as well. Yeah. So at least, you could trade through. But today, people are going to know. People want their money.
But I understood that the ratings agencies were going to start looking through the carriers to the MGAs and have a look at what was happening in the delegated authority market. And as that goes on, if you shine a light on something, you go, well, that doesn't look right to me. And so you think about the billions being done on delegated authorities in which the data is 60, 90 days out of date. And you think about the orgy of rekeying that's going on to get that data back into the carriers. And you think about how much that data decays as it's working its way through the system with fat finger syndrome everywhere. You think, well, that really is not sustainable if you shine a light on it.
I had a fascinating, slightly terrifying moment in an exposure management podcast we did recently, where it was Emma Watkins at Lloyd's sort of saying, when we analyse each syndicate, we look at the syndicates that are all on the same property programme, and none of their property data actually correlates.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing.
Absolutely.
It's it's not down to the last brick. It's absolutely, there are whole buildings missing from some of these schedules, or that they've down, one's thatched cottage and the other one's down as something with a tin roof. And then Rupert Atkin was also explaining, after Hurricane Katrina, they had a lot of the floating casinos down in Mississippi, in Biloxi, because they didn't fit into the box. What is it? Is it boat? Is that a casino? What is it? Is it fixed?
Yeah, absolutely. Is it cargo?
Is it property or is it marine? I don't know. It just ended up somewhere anyway, but it was not in our aggregate. I can tell you that. So, well, presumably you're a data optimist. At some point, the data will be cleaner.
Okay, so we went on that journey, and your data may be 60% accurate when you back test it against your models. And then when you model it going forward, it may become 80%. That's not a reason not to do it. It's not like the robots are out of control and you're going to be writing stuff you never wanted to write. You can put rules around it. You can put guardrails around it. So you're in a constant process of improving what you've got and learning from what you've got. But if you only ever sit and take the submission as it is without doing anything with it, you're only going to be as good as the submission.
I had a philosophical moment the other day when I suddenly realised that, of course, insurance doesn't work if there's no uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely.
So actually you can't insure things if you know they're already on fire. You have to insure a portfolio of houses and you know that 1 in 10,000 will be on fire, fine, but you don't know which one. That's the whole point. And everyone knows that their house could be on fire, which is why they're paying you a premium. It won't work otherwise. If you knew who's on fire, obviously that wouldn't be very good for the person who had the fire, would it? Because they wouldn't be able to get insurance.
Well, there's a big societal question about this. If you get more and more data on everything, as you say, if you've got telematics and you've got home sensors that are doing everything, and you know exactly what's going on everywhere, you're going to create a group of people who cannot get insurance.
Yeah, there has to be a societal thing to say, well, sorry, we have to pool this risk.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to have to pay £5 more.
Yeah.
Just to cover those other, which is why you have the flood reason.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is going to happen. You're going to create another uninsurable pool, which is interesting. So the data in the end, it's very deflationary in the end, I think, the data, because I think data is.
What about that tendency, we see it with cyber, with an obvious tendency to turn insurance into a service, being the sort of an emergency service, but also before the event sort of service. So it's particularly with cyber where it's so dynamic and is not something fortuitous. It's actually, there are some nasty people out there who are trying to break into your house every day and they're always out there throwing stones at your windows. And so you have to be really alert. Say, look, they've just got in the drains. You left the patio door open last night and now they're all in the living room. But that service, far more interactive. So, the insurance is there for when all these things go wrong and the really unforeseen events happen. But we're also here to stop them getting in.
It's your risk management. It's like your flood leak detector in your home,
Yeah. Will Crux go that route?
I'd love to get into it. I mean, there's some challenges. I'd really like to do cyber. When you think about the 3 things that you can do with cyber, and I may be making a bunch of cyber underwriters spit their coffee out now because I don't know what I'm talking about, but this is how I look at it from outside, is you've got awareness prevention, the know-befores and all those kind of people that you do your training on. So that's a good tick because you're taking it seriously. You've then got outside-in threats and monitoring that and working out. And then you've got inside-out, the dark trace type stuff. And it seems to me that having almost an analog policy that's written once a year with all of that dynamic digital movement going on between those three variables is not going to be right in the end. And the insurance is going to crack it somehow. But it's very hard to embed a product because who's going to distribute it? Does the broker sell an embedded product or does the software salespeople sell it? It's quite complex as a sale.
Yes, of course, yeah. And the compliance, some of these products that should not be sold to widows and orphans.
Yeah.
You look at some things like parametrics and you think, no, that should not be sold to the man in the street, the person in the street, because they won't understand the difference between one of those deductibles and the other.
Yeah.
And it could be very badly missold. At least they'll understand the product. They'll understand the binary nature of the product.
Yeah.
But they won't necessarily understand the difference between having flood height of 50 centimetres versus flood height of 1 metre.
Yeah.
And the difference between being about 1,000 years of return period. They won't understand that. Why is that one 50 quid cheaper? I'll buy that one.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that with all bits of technological advancement, you can do as much good as you can do bad. And so swords can be turned into plowshares and plowshares can be turned into swords. It's kind of like the way it is.
For good or
for good or for bad, yeah.
We're talking about cyber. Again, I think cyber is a really good proof of that MGA model working, particularly for new innovative business where the paper provider can dip their toe in the water. They don't have to write 100% of everything. They don't have to hire a big team. They don't have to make a big investment. Simply just back somebody who's doing something exciting in a way that is not going to break the bank for anybody. And then let them do the innovating and let them do the growth. And it was probably similar with D&O years before. I've just done a podcast with David Howden and I think, Dual, what did Dual do to start with? It rode on the coattails of an explosive growth class of the time was D&O, and really spreading that through the SMEs and really distributing it, doing it well. Whereas originally it was just the sort of Fortune 1000 companies that bought it, and then you knew that everyone was going to probably end up buying this. Same with cyber. Everyone's going to end up buying it. So what's the next cyber? Because it would be a great thing to know, to say, well, actually, if I got into this class, all I have to do is ride on the coattails of that, and in 20 years' time, I'm going to have $1 billion business.
Well, I think cyber is going to be the next cyber.
Well, in many ways, it still is, because there's so much growth potential.
So much going on it. And in the end, it's unthinkable. With the new toolkit, back to the swords and plowshares comment, with the new toolkits becoming available with ChatGPT and all these things, you can just see that the bad actors are going to get more tools to be able to do things, and the boomers like me are going to struggle to protect myself against it.
Certainly, I had a cyber special, and it was the most terrifying moment of that was the voice recognition stuff is going out of the window now, because we can't tell the difference between the auto-generated Mark Gagan voice and the real Mark Gagan.
And same face recognition. I think that's going to be crackable. So cyber is going to continue to evolve and be a massive opportunity. I'm not really a good crystal ball gazer on the rest of it,
but political risk, political violence seems to be something that is always going to be here.
Yes.
I hope it doesn't become the growth class.
Me either.
I don't hope it doesn't grow any more than what it already has.
I think I'm a bit more mundane than that. I think there are some problems to solve that are today's problems in classes that are big and built out. One of the areas you can get into is the global delegated authority market, where there's a lot of stuff going on.
So you're more agnostic. You just think the delegated authority is going to grow whatever happens. But specifically, for example, I had Keita on the show, which is insuring carbon credits. We're creating this new asset, and now that asset needs to be insured. Again, that's a classic thing where an MGA would really work.
Yeah.
Because there's physical loss, that it's credit, it's kind of a completion. There's some science in there. There's a ton of different things that can go wrong, even if it's just a simple sort of planting a forest somewhere. They might just take your money and not plant the forest for a start. Or it might be the wrong forest.
Yeah.
There might be the wrong sorts of tree that actually it's the wrong environment. They're not sequestering as much carbon as you thought they were going to, etc. And all these things that need finance.
Environmental is definitely here to stay, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. If you look at the big trends in the world, you've got declining populations in a lot of the West. You've got burgeoning populations in a lot of places which are going to be more affected by climate change, if we can take the statistics at face value. So you're going to have mass migration, and those are going to create huge issues.
But also always huge opportunities.
Huge opportunities, yeah.
And on that service, as we've seen with cyber, that cyber service, and let's face it, I suppose original fire insurance, it used to be the fire brigade was part of the insurance, and you had the fire mark on the side of your house, and the Norwich Union would actually come and put your fire out if you had the right fire mark.
Yeah.
But are there any other classes where you think there's an obvious way that you can get into that service provision end of insurance? I mean, it'd be difficult to describe that in political risk, political violence, for example.
Yeah, there's a lot of data enrichment you can do in PV that helps you, but I think providing other ancillary services.
I suppose you can't just have a load of mercenaries that you fly around.
No, that wouldn't be good. That wouldn't be good. I don't really know. I mean, I feel like it's not something I need to swing at now, but if you've got the right platform,
I suppose you can see a real time where threats
happening,
are.
Yeah. I think setting a new business up around brand new embedded product with loads of different services around it, a proper product, there's a heck of a risk in doing that. You're going to burn a lot of cash doing that. And how do you know that you can distribute it?
Yes. And it does increase the expense ratio. It tends to be paid for by a lower loss ratio as well, though. But it doesn't come for free.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're a technologist. I've got a technologist on the show. We've been talking so much about AI, and you just mentioned it in the previous answer there. What do you think are the best use cases you've seen so far within the insurance value chain?
So it would be what is being increasingly described as the agentic layer, which is the agent operating as an assistant and doing a load of things that you would have to do. So reading your email, reading your submissions, loading up your thing, doing it all for you. You haven't even got to look at it. That sort of is one place.
The thing reading the 1,000-page report.
Yeah.
And giving me a quick précis and saying, by the way, on page 57, there's something that I think you should look at.
The other area I think that's definitely being sold, and we're in the process of installing, is SOV ingestion. If you've got 33,000 properties, even if you reduce the error rate and you've only got to manually geolocate 100 properties, it's much easier than sorting out 33,000. So you can use the technology to make the mundane tasks much easier. And there's another army of people doing that. So if a big submission comes to London, goes to 10 syndicates, there are 10 data cleansing teams.
Bonkers,
I mean, it's madness. But I would say on AI, I'm a believer in the Gartner hype cycle, and there is a lot of overselling. If you think about what is knowledge, there are three types of knowledge. There's induction, deduction, and revelation. AI can definitely do induction and deduction. Can it suddenly change midway through an artistic career and produce cubism where it didn't exist before? That's a big question. And so from that comes a load of other analysis that might say it's not going to kill everybody and steal everybody's jobs. You've got to control it because it does hallucinate. But I believe that there's a real role for it in making people more efficient.
So it really is that being that indefatigable assistant.
Yeah.
Who's smart, but who's just going to make your day a lot easier and allow you to concentrate on that 20% of stuff that actually produces most of your value.
Yeah, so another way of looking at it would be, you've got a delegated underwriting authority, 88 pages long. You can feed that into your closed AI system. It reads it, it watches what the underwriter is doing, and it says, by the way, you're just about to breach your authority there. Because nobody rereads that 88 pages, unless they're really sad. Yeah. So you've just got this additional layer of augmented awareness for you about what you should be doing and not doing.
Remember the old Microsoft paperclip?
Clippy.
It's like, horrible thing. Go away. It looks like you're writing a letter. It's like, yeah, please go away. I'm writing a letter, yes, but you're not going to help me. But these days, hopefully we'll have one that really is absolutely fantastic. So you wrote the same letter last year. Should I bring it up for you? Yeah, and you just put the new date on it. Yeah, done.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
So that agentic layer is definitely the right place to be. And I think some of the more exaggerated claims, you've got to remember, if you don't have your core data in a proper data model, you can put all of the stuff on top of it you like, but you're still going to struggle. It doesn't get you out of having to tackle your legacy data.
Is it wishful thinking, though, to think that an AI couldn't? Because, you can't have an AI doing too much of your customer service because it can't really empathize. But what if it learned to empathize?
I think it can pretend to empathize.
It doesn't actually empathize.
But I think keeping it in proportion, there's going to be a lot of money made by somebody out of this, but there's going to be a lot of money lost by some people as this plays through, because it's not going to do everything that people claim it can. It's a black box and it's a mystery to the rest of us.
Yes. And people want to buy from people in the end. People do want to talk to human beings.
100%.
It's amazing. There are some tools where you can make a podcast out of just chuck a PDF into this thing and it'll make a podcast out of it. But I'm not sure anyone wants to listen to it. I'm kind of banking on the fact that they might still want to listen to real human beings. Well, I think they will. I think people like people. That's just something certainly I'd learned as a journalist. When we could have all these amazing stories and big scoops, but actually the ones that get the most clicks are always the story about the person. It's that Graham Elliott has left here and he's rocked up over there.
Yeah.
And they get 10 times more traffic than all the others because everyone knows Graham and they want to know, where's he gone? Oh, that's interesting. Much bigger than, Marsh takes over this big broker for billions.
The human element.
Yeah, because there's always the human element to all those stories. And it's, yes, of course, when Marsh does take over a big broker, obviously then suddenly there's all that fragmenting of a lot of people who then move because they don't necessarily want to work in a really big, or that they've been paid out, or that they're going to do something new and exciting with their lives, have a new challenge. Let's have one last big technology question. What do you think happens to the insurance value chain? We're on the cusp of really digitizing this market, this specialty market. And obviously it's taken a lot longer than we thought it was going to, and it's frustrated a lot of people. We know this is going to come. We can now have the confidence to say, okay, it's going to be delayed, but we know how to do it and it will happen. What do you think will actually happen when that finally occurs? What will the frictionless digital marketplace, what will it start doing that we probably don't expect it to do?
So I think there's some things you can expect it to do. If you look at the stock market, when it went from face trading to on-screen in Big Bang, which I'm old enough to have lived through, sadly, the spreads, i.e. the difference between what you could buy something for and what you could sell it for, narrowed. And they continued to narrow. And commissions for the brokers came down and continue to come down. So there's no question technology is deflationary in terms of it removes friction from the system and therefore it removes cost. So the thing is, one of the impacts will be it will find out, like it did me, we were doing a very good business. It was a $500 million business, but we weren't really adding value and it found us out. And I was so good at my job running global institutional equity sales that we closed the whole company down. So it finds you out in the end. Where there's no value being added, it will get you. The unintended consequences, I'm not so sure about, but I just think that's such
by definition, we'll never know what they are.
It's such an overwhelming theme, though, that if you think about the way there's an interface between humans and machines, it's always moving to the machines, and it has been doing that since the Industrial Revolution. Look at the number of people who used to work in farming in the US versus the number now. It's gone from 96% to 4% or something.
Yeah.
So if you want to have a 21st century career, you've got to move with it and you've got to move along as it moves and be there. If you stick where you are, you're going to get left behind.
Fascinating to thinking of zero brokerage world. Of course, we've got zero stock brokerage, isn't there? I mean, and now with Robinhood, they're just being paid for deal flow, which seems to be miraculous.
Well, the market maker behind it, Citadel Securities or somebody, is paying to have the deal flow, and then they make their money off that spread, the difference between the buy and the sell.
Yeah, so broking is going to become very interesting. What about when things are just getting placed instantly? How far do you think would you be going with algorithmic underwriting, for example?
It's absolutely got its place and it's real. I think.
Do you think specialty will always be able to hold out because it still does require a finger? You want a brain at the end of it.
Yeah, capital's going to want somebody to have a look at what's going on and understand it.
You need someone to blame if it goes wrong.
Yeah, quite. I mean, I don't really want to run a pure algorithmic business because I feel like I'm commoditizing what could be done. And I'm a believer in human beings and what they can add and alpha. But if you look at trading in the stock market, it's got more and more algorithmic, but it's still people who are programming the algorithms to do it and who understand the market.
And thinking about new strategies and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying out stuff and back testing it and working out whether it can work or not. And because it's a live environment, adjusting the strategies as other people adjust theirs to what you've just done. So it needs people.
One of my things, I think that we might end up not having treaties anymore because we won't need them. Of course, insurance is all facultative because, my car insurance, your car insurance, even though they're all sort of really homogenous risks, we've both got, drive a Ford Fiesta or whatever it is, and they know exactly what that's going to cost. But that goes to Aviva, but then Aviva buys a massive treaty, which has a huge minimum deposit premium. It's like a massive sledgehammer to crack lots of nuts.
Yes.
And it's not a very efficient structure. You think, well, sometimes they didn't use enough of it. Sometimes people ask for their minimum deposit premium back because that line of business didn't do as much as they thought it was going to. And as a broker, I've been in all those situations where you're kind of asking for minimum deposit premiums back, please. The difficult conversations that you end up having, you think, well, this treaty was badly designed. If you could do everything at the speed of light, everything would be facultative.
Yes.
Because all of the reinsurance on that could be bought immediately and syndicated, and then the retro bought on that.
Yeah.
Automatically.
Instantly, yeah, absolutely.
And just bang, it's gone.
I don't really know very much about insurance, and I know even less about reinsurance and retro. But a reinsurance broker once said to me memorably that he thought facultative re was the guided missile of the industry. And I think that's a great expression. It's always stuck with me as a way of thinking about it.
Yes, it's surgical.
It's surgical.
You take exactly the bit that you want. So I think that would be my prediction, that reinsurers, of course, Munich Re is still going to end up doing huge market share, but it's going to be doing it individually, facultatively, every millisecond, all the time.
Yeah.
Rather than once a year with a great big renewal and sort of, all sort of down at Baden-Baden and Monte Carlo. It won't really work like that. We'll still need that CEO to CEO portfolio aggregate discussion.
But the execution.
But they'll all be done on a micro level.
I agree with that. I think
million times a
I
second.
think that's a great future view. I agree with that totally.
Yeah, so we'll still be going to Monte Carlo, which would be good.
Great fun. I don't get invited, actually.
You're a great entrepreneur, Graham, so I think one of these days you'll be down there and you'll have a big yacht down there.
I won't.
No, I'm always waiting to be invited onto people's yachts. There's the only reason I'm doing this podcast is I can get to know lots of people who are going to be incredibly successful, and then you can invite me out on your yacht. So one of these days, it's on the record that if you ever do have one,
if I ever do one,
you're not a yacht.
It's not going to happen. But if I do, you're welcome. It'll be a rowing boat.
But you're very entrepreneurial. So what sort of entrepreneur are you? There are different types. The type who loves new ideas and proving concepts. But then once they've done it, they're quite happy to move on to the next idea. I'll give that to the operational person. I've made this gold mine and they can now exploit it. But I've came up with the idea of it and I thought it was a great place to drill for gold. And now I've found the gold. I'm actually now excited by a new problem I want to solve. Are you that sort of type? Or are you the type who will start the gold mine but be Graham Elliott Gold Mines Incorporated and something you can hand on to your children?
When you start a business up, it's a really personal thing and it's like having another child. And nobody wants to sell their child, but they might do because they've got no choice. And I didn't want to sell our last business. We needed to find another capital provider. And in doing that, we had 3 offers for the business. So it made sense to sell it. And it wasn't all about me. But if you asked all the people, they wanted to stick together. And I definitely don't have pharaonic syndrome, which is that problem where the pharaoh dies and then all the slaves have to be killed and buried in the pyramid with him.
That's good to know.
So I'm not driven by that. And I think it's basically, my thing is about the people. If you can get a great group of people together and really create something exciting, if you fall off on the way, that's cool completely. And I'm that kind of entrepreneur. I love the new. I love a brand. I love getting going on it. But actually what you want to do is create something that's got some, not legacy because that's egotistical, but has got some carry in it, institutional carry.
You're sort of Hannibal from the A-Team
Yeah.
with a cigar, and you love it when a plan comes together. Is that it? And
I wish.
Then the musical sequence starts and they start welding bits of the van, whatever. There's always something. There was always a fun moment in the A-Team, wasn't there, with that musical interlude where they were preparing for the big job that they had to do.
Yeah, I love all that stuff. But in the end, it's about the team. And the impact on your own wealth is a side effect of what you're doing. If you do a really good thing, you might make some good money out of it, but do a really good thing because that's what you want to do. That's my kind of person.
Graham, I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been excellent. We've had such a far-reaching conversation. I wish you all the best with Crux.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. I loved it. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this programme. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.